Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Rich Wragg. I'm the Vice Chair of the BHL Executive Committee and Head of Library and Archives here at the Natural History Museum in London. To those of you joining us in person and online, a huge welcome to BHL Day 2026. The proper welcoming remarks will come in just a moment, but it falls to me to run through a few logistical points. Today's symposium is being recorded and the recordings will be made available on the BHL Day event page. For those of you joining us online, captioning is enabled, and please use the Q&A to ask questions and make comments. The Q&A will be monitored throughout the symposium. For those of you in the Flet Theatre, we have got no fire alarm due to be tested, so if it sounds, it's the real thing. Should that happen, we keep our fingers crossed it won't, but if it does, if you make your way out, down the stairs you came up and out of the building at the front exit. Toilets, if anyone needs, are on the mezzanine, so that's again the staircase that you came up, and it'll be just to your right. We'll be having two Q&As during the symposium, so if I could ask everybody in the room and online, please, to save your questions. And for those of you in the room, we'll have roving microphones, so please do wait for them to arrive. It's really important so that the folks online can hear the questions and responses. Please be mindful that by participating in this event, we have all agreed to abide by BHL's Code of Conduct, and further details on the code are available from the link shown on the screen. And please also, if you're on social media, there is still some good stuff on social media, including about BHL. So if you are tweeting or posting or whatever, please use the hashtag BHL Day 2026. It's great for us to see your responses and what you think about the day, but also we've got an international audience, so it's a wonderful way to make connections and keep the conversation going. That is it for me. And so with all of that said, I'd like to welcome to the stage for a proper welcome Dr. Doug Gurr, Director of the Natural History Museum in London, who will get us underway. Doug.
Thank you, Rich, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. Huge welcome. And by the way, I always get a little thrill when we talk about libraries, because, you know, the Natural History Museum, as many of you may know, has actually been here in South Kensington since 1881, but we trace our roots all the way back to 1753. And in 1753, the British Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the British Library were all one institution, based in Bloomsbury, where the British Museum Library now sits. British Museum now sits. And the reason I get a little thrill, because if you think about the institution that had a natural history collection, it had a cultural artifacts collection, it had a library, and you say, well, what was the top job in that institution? And the top job was, of course, chief librarian. And if you ever go and wander around the British Museum boardroom and look at those all wonderful oil paintings of the former directors, you'll see they're not directors of the British Museum. They are chief librarian and director of the British Museum, so then was. So there you go. Because books, of course, were and are the pinnacle of all knowledge. So lovely to see you today, and very exciting to be celebrating the Biodiversity Heritage Libraries Day. And this is, I think, the 20th anniversary. We're thrilled to be hosting you here, and I think it's going to be a fascinating afternoon. And I think it's a great afternoon because I think this is a really interesting, pivotal moment for how we put to use something like the Biodiversity Heritage Library. You know, as many of you know, the museum has been clear that we face a planetary emergency. We know that the twin pressures of climate change and biodiversity loss are very, very significant. We also know this is a solvable problem. We can fix this. It's not impossible. It's probably not the hardest thing humanity's ever done. All we need to do is just nudge the world from that unsustainable path onto a sustainable path in which we can still have a reasonable level of global economic growth and meet people's reasonable expectations for a better life, but do it in a way that doesn't overconsume the Earth's natural resources. But to do that, we have to put together, and one of the biggest contributions we think we collectively can make, we have to put together the information, the tooling, the insight that can help everyone who makes decisions make the right decisions. And this is a really fascinating moment. It won't have escaped your notion, and your notice rather, that actually over the last couple of years we've seen a transformation in the sort of level of tools that enable us to interrogate large data sets, be they collections data sets or observational libraries. We now have available to us in principle incredibly sophisticated tools that can summarize it and extract, that can draw insight. And as I sometimes say, it's extraordinary how we've taken this unbelievable, powerful, transformative technology of data science and AI, and to date, bluntly, we've applied it to dating, shopping, and gossip. And I think we can do a bit better than that, can't we? And that's why we're in the room today. And we're in the room today because I think BHL, and I'll come back to exactly where it sits, but it is an absolutely pivotal cornerstone of an incredibly exciting project that we are loosely calling the Planetary Knowledge Base. This is a piece of work that many people in this room and elsewhere are working on. It's a global effort, ourselves together with our partners in comparable institutions all around the world, driven very much by some of the lead institutions. But it's really to say, how can we actually take those extraordinary new tools we have to actually draw insight from data, to make it usable, to put in a form that can actually be available to policymakers, to makers, decision makers in business, to everybody who needs the insight to say, what is the state of the natural world? What interventions are going to make a difference? How is it changing? What can we do? And that's, if you like, that tooling is out there and it's exciting. But it only works if it draws on an absolutely core, trustworthy, authoritative data set. If we point these amazing tools at the internet, we'll get a lot of garbage in and a lot of garbage out. If we point them at trustworthy, validated, authenticated data sets that can really help address the most important questions facing the natural world, we can do something extraordinary. And that's what we're kind of building. So yes, the tooling is there, we're working on it, we're doing the experiments, but almost most importantly, the contribution we can all make is to make sure that those unique and privileged data sets are there and are in the right shape. We have a collections data set, and some of you may be familiar with the DISCO project. We've just got the funding to actually digitize all, it's now 141.11 million specimens in the UK institutions, 107 institutions, an extraordinary data set. We already know from the work we've done just how powerful that is as a window back into time. We have the live observational data set. And as we begin to put in place not just our traditional, let's just go out there and count butterflies and birds and moths, nothing wrong with that, we love all species. But actually, if we really want to understand what's going on right now today, we have to use a combination of some of the most sophisticated automated sensing technology, coupled with things like the kind of incredible observational data we get through programs like the National Education Data Park, when we now have nearly 600,000 kids around the country taking observations, capturing them, triangulating them, using tech to actually get it. So you've got the collections data set, you've got the observational data set, we have an acoustic data set, we have a genomic data set, we're ingesting environmental data sets, and we have this unbelievable asset, 63 million digitized pages representing the whole of scientific knowledge and understanding from the last however many years. That is the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And I honestly can't think of anything more exciting than saying, after 20 years of unbelievable work to create this asset, now we have this unique moment where we can put it to use. So that's kind of what we're going to chat about today. I think it's pretty cool. I hope you think it's pretty cool. And with that, I will shut up and hand you over to the chair of BHL's Executive Committee, David. You're going to come along and I think kick us off for the day. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Doug. And thank you. Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to BHL Day 2026, towards a biodiversity data ecosystem built on BHL data, presented as part of our 2026 annual meeting. I am David Iggulden. I'm chair of the Biodiversity Heritage Library Executive Committee, and it's my pleasure today to welcome you on behalf of all of us at BHL. Our symposium sees us both celebrating the 20th anniversary of BHL, whilst recognising the opportunity to review our position in the field and identify opportunities for BHL to become more integrated into the wider bioinformatics data environment. We hope that it will also shine a spotlight on the potential for BHL data to form the foundation for a more interconnected ecosystem of collections data in support of research. As we mark this 20th anniversary of BHL, Our opening talk will reflect on BHL's evolution from a pioneering digitisation initiative to a globally governed, community-supported infrastructure and a critical component of the global biodiversity data ecosystem. It will trace key milestones across BHL's history and highlight how BHL's transition has established the foundations for a more resilient, collaborative and data-connected future, positioning BHL for what comes next. It therefore gives me great pleasure to introduce Bianca Crowley, our Digital Collections Manager, and Nicole Kearney, our Communications Director, to lead us through BHL at 20, a milestone and a new chapter. Thank you.
Greetings and happy 20th to BHL. Before my esteemed colleague helps us look to the future, I would like to use the most famous of British Beatles to reflect on yesterday. BHL's identity is based on a long and winding road of vision and growth in our collection, technology, services, and partnerships. Before 2006, because there was the problem of the taxonomic impediment where much of the world's biodiversity literature was available in few select libraries in the developed world, great minds met at this very museum for the library and laboratory meeting to share their vision of a freely accessible digital library of biodiversity literature and archives. With the founding of BHL in 2006, this vision started to come together as 10 institutions with world-class natural history collections formed on an agreement built on collaboration, service, and resourcefulness. From 2007 to 2010, it was a hard day's night as BHL was working like a dog to develop core technical infrastructure and services, feed the beast of mass digitization, and increase its collection by millions of pages. Starting in 2010, BHL began expanding its outreach efforts and partnerships across the universe. It fostered relationships with global partners in Africa, Australia, Brazil, China, Egypt, Europe, Mexico, and Singapore. Oh, forgive me. Getting ahead of myself. It also launched itself across the universe of the internet into the then still promising and genial social media and community engagement platforms like Flickr, Facebook, and Twitter. From 2012 to 2018, BHL got by with a lot of help from its friends. It welcomed many new partners into its consortium and launched a new website in collaboration with BHL Australia. It got a species of land snail named in its honor, added its 50 millionth page, and celebrated its 10th anniversary, also here in this museum. To all our friends who have helped BHL throughout the years, especially to those we've lost from this earth, thank you. 2019 to 2024 was a happening time when BHL got groovy with identifiers and expanded its data interoperability. Tomorrow never knows where BHL metadata will float downstream and make a lasting impact. What BHL becomes in the future is grounded in its identity as a collaborative, resourceful library, passionately pursuing its mission to make biodiversity literature openly available to the world.
By 2025, the Biodiversity Heritage Library had grown to be one of the world's largest virtual libraries of biodiversity literature and archival material, and one of the world's most critical resources of biodiversity knowledge. However, in March of 2025, the Smithsonian, our home since 2006, announced that it would cease to host BHL at the end of the year. The loss of the Smithsonian had dire consequences for BHL. The Smithsonian had provided the global BHL Secretariat staff, the BHL technical team, as well as the 7 servers required to run the BHL website and the website itself. Fortunately, our BHL community was already coming together in April for our annual global meeting. These meetings are usually a time for the celebration of shared successes, but last year's meeting was entirely focused on how to save BHL and our BHL staff. In May, we formed a transition leadership team, appointing the fabulous Kelly Try as BHL's transition director and myself in the role of communications director. Together with the BHL Secretariat and the BHL's Executive Committee, we have worked tirelessly over the past year to build a foundation for a more autonomous, global and sustainable BHL. Our first step was to communicate this scary news to our partners and our users worldwide. We did not know what we were going to do or how we would secure the support we needed to continue or what the future of BHL might look like. So it was more important than ever to communicate more regularly and more openly with our community and to reassure them that we would do everything we could to save BHL. This blog post became the first of many, which along with our frequent social media posts have kept our global community informed and engaged about our BHL transition. The threat to the BHL resulted in an overwhelming outpouring of appreciation and panic from our users. These included statements like, BHL is one of the most important and most valuable online projects and one of the greatest collections on the internet. It's an indispensable record of the Earth's biodiversity and an absolutely vital resource for ecologists and evolutionary biologists. In June, we launched a global call for support to invite expressions of interest from our community, our stakeholders and institutions to host BHL's operational and technical roles and services. The call remained open through the middle of last year and it soft closed at the end of August. Alongside that call for support, we developed guiding principles for the BHL transition, reaffirming our commitments to open access, open governance, inclusive collections, the modernisation of our infrastructure and alignment with FAIR principles. Central to our transition was a move to a new financial and legal home. As of August, BHL has operated independently via a fiscal sponsor, the Council on Library and Information Resources. And this partnership means that BHL is now able to independently pursue donations, apply for grants, and manage our own staff contracts. It also provides BHL with autonomy. So BHL is no longer constrained by the requirements and shifting priorities of a single US federal institution. We're now able to operate as an autonomous global consortium. Our call for support resulted in offers of technical hosting, support for our existing systems, some funding for staff, and a few very welcome lump sums, which will provide BHL stability for 1 to 2 years. You will have seen many of these commitments announced in the past few months on the BHL blog. If you haven't, please go back and look, including 2 new member announcements, each providing significant technical support. The University of South Florida will provide significant system support for Macaw, which is BHL's metadata collection and workflow system, for the next 3 years. While Vanderbilt University's Herd Libraries had provided an associate cloud engineer, a huge welcome to Rahul Sharma, who joined the BHL technical team in February. His role will help build a resilient, modern technical foundation for BHL, improving our performance, scalability, and long-term sustainability. This week, there will also be an announcement of a 3rd new BHL member, the Senckenberg Society for Nature Research. These 3 member organisations all joined BHL during a year of significant uncertainty. They looked at our consortium in transition with our unsolved funding model and said, we want to be a part of this. This is a huge statement of community confidence in BHL. But the announcement that most excited our community was that the Field Museum would be taking over the hosting of the BHL website and our technical infrastructure. This was the answer to the most frequently asked question from our users during the transition. But what's going to happen to the BHL website? We've been overwhelmed by outpourings of excitement and relief from BHL users across the globe in response to the announcement that the Field Museum is taking over the website. One of the most important realizations in our transition was that we need to diversify our funding. At the end of 2025, we ran a targeted campaign called Give BHL Wings, asking our BHL community to help BHL take flight by the 1st of January 2026. We set a target of $50,000 for that campaign and we hit that goal on New Year's Eve, which made my year. We've continued our fundraising efforts into this year and we've now received over $85,000 in public donations, over 950 donations from 44 countries, which demonstrates how deeply BHL is valued across the globe. On January 1st, BHL officially ended its new independent chapter. On the left is the blog explaining what this means, this independence means for BHL and its users. And in February, we shared the tremendous news that all existing BHL staff positions had been saved, ensuring that the incredible passion, expertise, and institutional knowledge would continue to guide BHL's future. This post also announced Colleen Funkhauser's very well-deserved move into the role of BHL's Managing Director. 2026 not only marks the beginning of BHL's exciting new chapter, it is also our 20th anniversary. A huge thank you to Bianca for sharing her fabulous history of BHL across the eras, and as BHL's longest serving Secretariat staff member for everything she's done for BHL across these many years. One of the ways we're celebrating this huge milestone is by showcasing the extraordinary breadth and history of BHL's collections and the institution and peoples who make BHL possible. Follow along on the BHL blog this year as we share 20 treasures from BHL's collection chosen by our BHL community. BHL's long-term future is still uncertain, but it is rapidly filling with opportunities and possibilities. Today's BHL Day provides a glimpse of what BHL might become. Across the upcoming talks, you'll see biodiversity literature transformed into data, into connections, into possibilities, and into something that can be built upon in entirely new ways. I invite you to lean in, be inspired by what follows, and join us as we imagine BHL's future together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole and Bianca. I'd like to think somewhere in this building there's a geologist giving a presentation making Rolling Stones quotes. Nicole thanked and recognised a few people there, but make no mistake, without Nicole's hard work, BHL wouldn't have moved through that moment of crisis into what is, I think, altogether more positive. So thank you as well to Nicole in amongst everyone else. Okay, so we move to our next speakers and presentation, and I'd like to introduce to the stage Qianqian and Ben Hartley, also with contributions from Vince Smith, who I'm afraid couldn't be here today. And they're going to be picking up on something that Doug mentioned earlier, which is the BHL and the Planetary knowledge base.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting us to be here to talk today. So just to echo what everyone else has been saying today, the Biodiversity Heritage Library represents an extraordinary achievement. Over 63 million pages, 300,000 volumes, 203,000 titles, and 260 million species names. It really is one of the most important biodiversity collections ever assembled. And for most of the history of biology, publications were the primary medium through which biodiversity knowledge was communicated and preserved. Across centuries, scientists have documented species discoveries, observations, ecological relationships, anatomical details, geographic distributions, taxonomic ideas through papers, monographs, floras, expedition reports, and revisions. And BHL preserves this accumulated intellectual history of biodiversity science. And what makes this collection remarkable is not simply the scale of the collection, but the continuity of scientific knowledge it represents across many, many centuries. So traditionally, scientific publications have acted as that storage layer. All the knowledge is there, but it's embedded in the narrative text, tables and images, and it's very difficult to extract and reuse. It's something like organisations like Plaza have been pioneering for years, but it's this idea that biodiversity literature should not just be readable by humans, it should be computationally accessible to machines so we can program and analyse the data in new ways. And so what we want to talk about today is a kind of biodiversity data prison break. We can extract not just the text, but the data locked within it. And that makes all of that information something we can start using with AI and computers, and it changes the role of literature and the role of BHL. Instead of something you read, it becomes something you can compute over. And once you can do that, you can connect it into other data sets, run analyses across it, and ask entirely new kinds of scientific questions. So this talk is not just about improving access to BHL, it's about turning centuries of biodiversity knowledge into something we can actively use. At the Natural History Museum, we've been exploring what becomes possible when we unlock biodiversity literature at scale for many, many years. One of the examples I've worked on, and Hiris has worked on for the last 5 years, is ADEPT. And this is a machine learning workflow for extracting plant functional traits from taxonomic descriptions. And functional traits are vital because they shape ecological strategy, climate tolerance, morphology, environmental response to climate change. But the existing trait databases that we needed to model the biodiversity responsive only covered a small proportion of known plant diversity. But the biodiversity literature contains that trait data captured in the text. So we wanted to develop machine learning models that can mine that huge corpus of traits, searching BHL for botanical descriptions from which we could extract structured trait data. We ran the machine learning pipeline that we developed across all accepted angiosperms, so 342,000 species, and we extracted 706,000 trait values across 81 functional traits, and detected 106,000 botanical descriptions covering 59,000 species. We couldn't detect botanical descriptions for every species because it was just English language. And that enabled trait extraction at a scale that would have been impossible manually. And by doing so, we created one of the largest open access trait data sets ever assembled just from the BHL literature. But it's important to understand how much work was required to make that possible, because behind these data outputs was a huge amount of bespoke coding and infrastructure. We trained transformer-based models to detect the descriptions. We need to classify that text. We needed to transform the output and harmonize it, and then validate that with experts. And while the science and data outputs were highly successful, it exposed a much larger issue. We cannot build these bespoke pipelines for every biodiversity problem. We need to unlock biodiversity literature at scale. So we need generalizable AI and machine learning infrastructure. And that's where we are today. We're at a turning point. The AI landscape has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. We started this project developing transformer-based models, which were brilliant at the accuracy side of things, but much harder to customize when you want to start expanding into multilingual, training it across, or reading across the entire BHL corpus. And so what we started doing is incorporating large language models, which are much faster extracting the data that we need, and understanding the syntactic structure of the text that we're trying to pull out the traits from. But that itself surfaces other challenges in terms of cost and data hallucinations, and you then need more sort of downstream data processing, validation of the data. So the question is no longer whether or not it's possible to use large language models, but how do we build the infrastructure to allow us to do it? And I'll now hand over to Hiris to give a bit more detail on that.
All right. So it's actually the turning point, because as Ben mentioned this, now the AI is actually having really good performance in data processing stuff. So that's the reason why we actually start thinking about questions. So is it possible to actually turn BHL into a different ways, and how we actually investigate the data from BHL in a different perspective? So that's the reason why we start a prototype, and we actually test with across 2 different journals, so the Northern Journal and the Linear Society Journal, and more than 35,000 pages across like different year decades, and it's like it is actually not a conceptual like things, but it's what we actually have an actual live prototype with it, and like. So like the purpose is just one to actually make sure that's like it's actually turning all of the BHL scanner pages into a machine readable and like data like analysis like possible like data sets. And sorry, yeah, this is actually the data processing like workflow. So what we start with the OCR, and we all notice the BHL data is current OCR data is actually quite it's sometimes actually a while ago. So what we have done first is try the latest Mistral OCR model, applied it on it, and the word accuracy can actually achieve 99% on all the BHL data we test. And then after we got a really good high accuracy data, we just parsed the OCR data into a Claude model, the LLM model, to automatically extract the taxon, habitat, locality, and also institutions. And we did actually have standardized process after all of these extractions, so that's we can actually use this entity to construct a knowledge graph, and that's what in the fourth things. And simultaneously while extracting the OCR, we also extract illustrations, plays, tables, and figures from all of the BHL data. So we actually have some sort of more richer meta data source for the prototype. And so for the new interface, what it will look like is actually, instead of a general keyword search, we have also some of the filters, and have the visibility of each individual type of entities in the BHL. So every time when we actually search, we also provide summarizations associated with each individual article search. So the aim for the summarization is actually to shorten the times for people actually want to locate their crucial main aims for the articles in this purpose, because sometimes we know this for searching the BHL is a little bit that for people. So that's the things. And we for the entities because we highlight them into different colors, so it's much more user friendly for locate different contexts. So if you're actually only looking for people, that you don't actually need to look for those different colors things. And we do actually have a live demo, and so happy to be approached. And so so what this will actually open up to the possibility of BHL is actually the searching engines, as we mentioned this, because we use all of the BHL data to construct a knowledge graph. So this will provide searching engines a little bit more knowledge, for the search engine to learn the semantic meanings, or how the linking behind. So it's actually a graph rec model, but I won't go into any technical detail. And just call back to what Ben mentioned this, the previous model we have done for the trade model is actually only English, so it's actually limited to multilingual search and possibility. But for the LLM model, because we have the knowledge graph behind for the search engine, so we are now able to do the multilingual search, so you can just search Latin or whatever you want. And it's we have because we also extract the image as well, so it will be able to do image search. And the image search is not only for searching similar or mapping scientific illustration or plates, but it will actually be able to locate the actual taxon. And so this is another powerful things about AI. And this will, like after the searching functions, it's actually provide another possibility for more wider like open data linkage, like for the BHL, because after we got really standardized corpus, like we can try to link like the illustration to, for example, heritage collection, or like linking those of the institutions like to the institution library, or linking individual people back to binomials, or like Wikidata as most possibility that's allow the BHL to link everything. And it's like we also got like got a really good like knowledge graph and all of the like the really clean data source and the like BHL corpus right behind this model. So this allows more like possibility for scientific analysis. And also another things I actually forgot to mention is actually like we after like a really good OCR performance, we did actually experiments like for automatically detecting title page in each individual books, and this like we do actually have really good accuracy. So for like books like without table of contents, we can actually achieve around 98% of title page detections, and around 100% like for books like with content like table of contents. So this functions actually allows like we can automatically chunk like books into different articles, and so that's why we can actually have like individual DOIs or publication records or citation associated with each individual article. And this is kind of like solving a problem that actually like people are actually quite struggling like finding an article in like especially historical literature. And we did actually have like experiments statistics like associated with like these experiments as well. And so like for now, it's actually the points as I should introduce our planetary knowledge base, like what Doug and Ben already mentioned it, is actually like for as I just mentioned, is like we do actually have some sort of a standardized process, like after like the LM extract the taxon, and that is actually synergy by our PKB, because we do actually have like a really huge knowledge graph like behind to standardize the data. So, but BHL itself is actually providing a really good resource like for our PKB as well. So they are actually kind of like interacting with each other. It's actually a two-way relationship. And I will actually hand over to Ben like for a little bit more about PKB.
So what you're looking at here is the broader system we're building, the planetary knowledge base, and the idea is quite simple, but extremely powerful. So what we're trying to do is bring together two complementary components. On one side, foundation models. So giving us the ability to read, interpret, and reason over vast amounts of unstructured biodiversity data, like the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And on the other side, knowledge graphs, which give us structured, connected representations of the biodiversity domain. So the species, the specimens, the people, the places, and the publications. Sorry, excuse me. And the real power comes from combining the two systems. So the domain adapted foundation model allows us to extract and interpret information, and the graph gives that information structure, context, provenance, and connectivity. So I'm sure you're all aware of ChatGPT and the hallucinations. The graph allows us to impose like a layer over that, so you don't have those hallucinations. You can check the facts as it's generating for you. And this is exactly where the BHL work fits in. What we're doing is taking the scientific literature that BHL has accumulated, all those tens of millions of pages, and we're turning it into something that could be integrated directly into this system. So literature stops being a passive resource, and it becomes a key integral part of the knowledge base that we're trying to build. And when you then combine that with specimen records, observations, genomic resources, environmental data, you start building a far more complete and connected picture of biodiversity, and a system that's capable of supporting discovery, analysis, reasoning, and decision making.
And just to reiterate what Hiris was talking about, so the prototyping work that we've been proposing with BHL, so we have a fully funded software engineer or data scientist for a year. We have Hiris, who is our exceptionally talented AI developer, and we have 50k for cloud compute for Mistral OCR. And what we would like to do is re-OCR the entire BHL corpus, and we need that data as well for the planetary knowledge base, and then we can provide that back to the BHL community. We'd like to develop our articleization and our entity extraction processes and turn those into production models, so you can run that against the entire BHL corpus and start surfacing those entities for your users and for your for the end users of the BHL platform. We'd also like to prototype a subset of BHL for in the Invenio RDM. We have, after this morning's meetings, maybe sort of tweaked that a little bit, and that we might, rather than developing in Invenio RDM prototype, we develop a prototype search interface, so surfacing this graph that we'll be developing alongside the BHL interface. And yes, that's what we'd like to do, continuing to work with BHL and aligning with our planetary knowledge base over the next year. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ben and Hiris. That's incredibly exciting to hear about. Our next speaker comes to us from the University of Glasgow, a great and long-standing supporter of BHL, always with something interesting to say. So please welcome Rod Page.
Okay, lights, camera, action. I have this really annoying habit of agreeing to give a talk and then changing the title at the last minute. There will be some interfaces here, I promise. But I thought I'd also maybe take a moment to kind of give a sort of overview, I think, where BHL is and some directions it might go. I came to this change of heart because I have a slight sense of deja vu. 10 years ago, when BHL was 10, I gave a talk, I think actually in this very lecture theatre. This, the person on the right with the brown hair and the striped t-shirt and the bad posture is me. Two of those things are probably gone. So basically, I was thinking about this, I was looking at those slides again, and I was trying to get a sense of where has BHL been, where is it now, and where might it go? So first up, as we're all very aware, as Nicole and Bianca gave us a sort of background, the last couple of years have been a bit rough, and quite a few things have happened. So the world's largest natural history museum, some people in this audience may quibble at that, we won't worry about that, basically say goodbye to BHL. There seemed to be the possibility of getting some money from, in this case, an organisation called Invest in Open Infrastructures. They said, apply for some money, and then they said no, which is a bit sad. So BHL has kind of been basically reduced to pleading for money. And you often go to the BHL website and you'll see this, which I find one of the most annoying things. What makes it even more annoying is it's been incredibly successful, as Nicole will be the first to tell you. So as annoying as it is, it's actually worked very, very well. There's another anniversary coming up. For a 20th anniversary, happens next year. It's for the iPhone. And it bugs me no end that even today, BHL doesn't quite work on the iPhone. So taking at this, we can sort of look at this, and it's been a rough time. Maybe we can breathe a sigh of relief and move on. But I'd like to pause just a bit and take stock of where we are. So I've got two slides here, and it's very confusing. Where is BHL now? So I think an accurate assessment of where we are is going to require us to be open and transparent, which is a bit buzzwordy. What do I mean by open? I think, firstly, this is the new BHL forum. Is this yet on the website. I think it's supposed to be officially launched. If it's not officially launched, we will now consider it officially launched. Sorry, Colleen. This is where we've set up a platform where people can go and interact with BHL staff members and also other members in the community. If you've ever interacted with a forum with GBIF or iNaturalist or Crossref, it's become the sort of default platform that we use for this kind of thing. I noticed something the other day. There's a really big gender split in avatars. So if you're female, you tend to say, hi, I'm here, I'm a real person, here's a photo. If you're male, it's like you hide behind some child's drawing or a random animal, or I think Joel is hiding behind some piece of architecture. It really sort of struck me. If you have any interest in BHL, this is a place you can go and sort of find out how it works, offer suggestions, share technology, and all sorts of things. So I think we're making progress on being open. Now, being transparent. So one approach to being transparent is to have a dashboard. Everybody loves a dashboard. One of the problems with dashboards, now BHL kind of has one already, but most dashboards sort of look like this. They're big numbers and they're forever going up. You'll go to some websites like Atlas of Living Australia, the numbers tick over frantically. Look at how wonderful we are. We've got lots and lots of numbers. And yes, BHL is wonderful. We've got 68 million pages. We have, what else have we got there? We've got 400,000 parts, those are articles. And we have nearly 300,000 DOIs that are regularly cited. But that doesn't give you the full picture. It's just big numbers and they're always going to go up. So let's try and drill down a bit. So I want to look at a couple of things. Firstly, where does BHL's content come from? Now, you might think it comes from libraries and natural history museums and herbaria, and a lot of it does. The number one provider of content for BHL is the United States Department of Agriculture. Far and away the biggest source, and there's some implications that I'll show you in a moment. Number two is the Smithsonian. There's the NHM down there. So you might be a little surprised at where that content comes from. In terms of the temporal coverage, so there's two charts here. So now, apologies to Rich and all the archivists in the room. I decided BHL starts at 1700. I know there's much older stuff. I don't care. I've stopped it there. Here is the present day. So first up, BHL has a huge time range, including stuff that's been published this year. Why is Mickey Mouse there? One of the initial big barriers for BHL has been copyright, particularly public domain in the US. And when BHL started, that was, I think, 1922, which is partly due to the Walt Disney Corporation wanting to keep Mickey Mouse in their hands. So this is the coverage of when these items were published that's in BHL. So old stuff and new stuff. This is when this content got into BHL. Starts down here, burst of enthusiasm, lots more activity, slightly tapering off down here. Okay, so now we can drill down a bit. Smithsonian has been one of the largest contributors, fairly massively hit by Mickey Mouse, but still some 20th century and 21st century content. Big engagement early on, but still lots of kind of contributions, sort of tapering a bit during COVID. The Natural History Museum in London. So this is the NHM. Doesn't care so much about 1922, lots of enthusiasm at the start, and then it kind of tapers off. And last year, 8 items uploaded. Kew, the other venue we're going to be attending. So this is Kew's record. So it's sort of a reasonable kind of time range, not a huge amount of content, tapering off at the moment. And the final one I want to show is where we met last year. This is the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin, which has fairly limited kind of temporal coverage and also not many items. Now, the point of this is not to name and shame. What I'm really interested in is why is this happening? Why is, for example, institutions that have been putting lots of stuff into BHL, why is it tapering off? Why are these other institutions not contributing much? What's the impediment? Is it funding? Is it staff? What's going on? Now, to give you an example, BHL has a very particular meeting structure, which is quite unusual in my experience. The meetings here are 5 days. There's a meeting the day at the start and the day at the end where we go on tours of libraries. And we admire the wonderful books and the wonderful ceilings. This is Berlin. And we walk past these things. And in these tours, I've never seen these being used. In this case, in Berlin, I actually asked what the problem was. And again, it was a lack of staff. They didn't have anybody who could scan. So it seems to me kind of tragic that we sort of are looking through these kind of libraries and the scanning seems to have stopped. Maybe we could do something about it. For example, every year when BHL meets, there is an iNaturalist BioBlitz. People are running around in the sunshine, photographing stuff. Why is there not a scanning blitz? Why can't we do the same for these books? Instead of walking past them and looking at them, why don't we start scanning them? Now, you might think this is kind of crazy and not call us a training. There's a thing called a scan tent, which I was going to bring, but it just was slightly too big. This is something for about 200 euros. You put your phone on top and you basically scan stuff. This is the Public Museum in Paris. Some of you might remember the days of Xerox machines. This is their answer to that. You stick your phone on top. So why don't we, for each library we visit, start scanning stuff? Obviously, it's a small kind of step, but I think there's so much scope to sort of try and understand why digitization is starting to drop off. If we step back a bit, this is a sort of 10,000-foot view of BHL. And if you wondered what is the number one sort of content in BHL, to a first approximation, BHL is an English language database of American seed catalogs. The top 10 subjects for items in BHL are things like catalogs, seeds, nurseries, plants, ornamental, and so on. This is because the big chunk of content comes from the USDA. The number 2 language that's covered by BHL is unknown. So it's very heavily dominated by English language and essentially agricultural stuff, which is maybe not what you expect from a biodiversity library. Now, to be fair, this is a universal problem. So I could hassle Joe about the fact that GBIF is, to first approximation, a database of birds. It has billions of records, and billions of those are birds. And obviously, that's an incredibly biased summary of biodiversity, but obviously, GBIF is still highly useful. And Wikidata is, to first approximation, a database of scholarly articles. There are so many in there that we kind of broke it, basically, because we got too carried away. So every database has bias. But at the same time, there's some aspects of this bias that drive me slightly crazy. This is a recent item added to BHL. Cigarette smoking in Los Angeles County. Now, okay, it's tobacco, it's plants, and I guess we could all think about One Health and so on, but the connection between that and biodiversity seems to me to be pretty tenuous, and there's a lot of this stuff in there. Now, on the one hand, you know, I'm griping about something, maybe it doesn't matter that much. The reason I get so upset about this is this gets into BHL, but a lot of this stuff doesn't. So there are many journals, many of them small, ecological, taxonomic journals, which are going extinct. We talk about species extinction. There's also extinction of a lot of this knowledge. These are often journals run by a single person who happens to be a taxonomist. They retire, the journal goes, or the website vanishes. We should be hunting those down and preserving them. Now, sometimes we do. This is the journal on the right that basically the author running it, the editor running it, threw up his hands, gave up, basically closed down the website. Another publisher came along and stole the website. Now, BHL managed to save that. Journals like this domain's gone. So I don't mind if there's cigarette smoking stuff in BHL, so long as we also get that. And I think one of the sort of things BHL needs to sort of tackle is trying to get lots more content in a lot more rapidly. This is an archive that I've been building where I try and capture some of these journals before they go. There are other projects like that. It seems really difficult to get this stuff into BHL. So this is one thing I'd really, really like to see. Okay. Where might BHL go? So I just want to talk about a couple of aspects here. So we'll actually finally talk about the topic I was supposed to talk about, which is interfaces. I think there's lots of things that we could do with that. I've been playing with various ideas. This is something I showed last year in Berlin. I would love to have BHL work properly on my iPhone. The reason for that is every Sunday I wake up and the first thing I do after a coffee is have a look at the BHL website, because that's when the new content appears. And I think is the cool stuff there that I can put into BioStore and get articles from. And of course, it's a bit hard to see. So this is just an experiment showing you that there are ways you can visualize this kind of content on a fairly small kind of device. And I like to sort of play with this a little bit more. Now, this is just one example. If you are in Norway in September, BHL has 2 events in Oslo for TADWIG 2026. one of which is going to be a workshop on BHL, where the goal is to basically present a bunch of possible interfaces to BHL. Now, this is one of those cases where I'm in danger of over-promising and under-delivering, but I want to present things like Google-like search interfaces, map-based searches. This is a little snapshot there. What you're seeing there is the map of a set of query results. So you could imagine searching for, I don't know, caves, and you get a map of where all the publications about caves are appearing on the world. Other possibilities, more taxonomic-focused browsing, image search, these are to do, but hopefully it'll be a way to kind of explore some of these future interfaces. Now, the final thing I want to touch on is sort of where BHL sits in the broader kind of community. And I want to touch on something that some of you may have heard of before. This is the Dissentus Roadmap. So this is one of these kind of documents that comes out every so often. It's a kind of vision statement of the future of biodiversity literature. And the thing that is quite striking to me is that BHL doesn't seem to play a particularly prominent role in that document. So BHL is mentioned, but it doesn't seem kind of like as front and center as you might expect, given what we think of BHL. And there's a wonderful diagram like this. This is kind of, if you haven't sort of come across this idea, it's this idea of essentially taking the world's biodiversity literature, mainly in the form of PDFs and XML, getting stuff out of it and putting it in all these kind of external databases. A little bit like the kind of stuff we talked about, we saw in the previous talk, not necessarily AI driven at this stage. And there's BHL as just one sort of tiny little thing, and we don't really do XML or PDFs. So I think there are interesting questions about the role that BHL will play in this kind of landscape. I confess I'm always deeply skeptical of these kind of diagrams. If you inspect some of these things, you discover that some of them, there's GenBank, there's GBIF, there's Globy, various kind of things. Some of these things don't seem to exist. I'm not totally sure what's going on with all of these things. But this is kind of one potential view of the roadmap of the biodiversity literature of the future, and BHL seems to be a minor player in that. So I want to leave you basically with three questions. So the first is, why is BHL not front and center when people have these kind of discussions? I also think BHL needs to think about what it really wants to be. It sort of started out being a digital library, and it's done that very well. The landscape is changing. Are we going to think in terms of being a data platform, the kind of things that we've seen already? Where is its role in that kind of landscape? Does it want to be the place of last resort to rescue some of these journals that are busy kind of vanishing? And lastly, the landscape has certainly changed. AI is changing many things. And one of the things that can change, as we've seen in the previous talk, is the ability to extract information and structure from papers. And just thinking back to BHL being a library, most of our kind of libraries are based around scanned images, pictures, or PDFs. AI speaks none of those. It speaks Markdown, which is a very simple kind of text-based kind of format. So what would a library of the future based on Markdown look like? How would that differ from our present sort of obsession with PDFs and scans of pages? Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Rod. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, possibly from BHL's tech team and NHM's library digitizers. We'll see. We are going to hold questions, as I mentioned earlier, but for folks online, if you have any, please pop them into the Q&A at any time. But for now, we're slightly ahead of time, but we're going to move on with our program, and we're going to shift up a gear with some lightning talks. The first of those, I have been told, could the speakers please make sure they're speaking into the microphone and try not to speak whilst looking towards the slides. It's making it difficult for folks online to hear. Sorry, excuse me. I will now introduce properly from a very pretty library where I am certain that digitization is going on at pace, Cambridge University Library and Archives. Please welcome Liz Smith and Mike Hawkins.
Hi, I'm Liz. This is Mike. For efficiency's sake, because this is the lightning talk, I'm going to talk, and Mike is here to answer questions later. So we both work at Cambridge University Libraries and Archives, and for many of those years we were working for the Darwin Correspondence Project. And now that that's finished, we're both responsible for the project's digital legacy. So for those who don't know, the Darwin Correspondence Project was a research team run out of Cambridge University Library. It was founded in 1974 by American academic Fred Burkhardt, along with Cambridge zoologist Sidney Smith, and they were kindly granted copyright permission by George Pember Darwin, which made our lives a lot easier. It was intended to locate and publish the letters both to and from Charles Darwin, which in 1974 was a pretty unusual choice, and it has influenced a lot of the correspondence editions that came since. I think it was originally intended to be a retirement project and last about 5 years. It contains, now that it's finished, about 16,000 letters to and from Charles Darwin, of which we hold 9,000 at Cambridge University Library. The result is a rich resource that represents about 50 years of scholarship and has been left behind not only in print volumes, but also tens of thousands of TEI XML files. The computing history of the project is long and interesting and definitely doesn't fit in a lightning talk. But we ended up eventually from about 2017 in TEI XML because it was a gold standard for digital humanities. So the data that we've ended up with is really rich in information about all of the many subjects Darwin worked on. It represents about 50 years of his life and information about the natural world on every continent through the 19th century. This is especially important because Darwin famously went around the world once and then basically never went anywhere ever again, except to the Isle of Wight on holiday. But of course, he continued to work on global distribution and species all over the world. And the way he got the information to work from was from publications that he was reading and also from his correspondence. And all of that information that he was taking in is still present in the material that we have. So as part of managing this digital legacy, we've been treating these XML files as the core data of the project and surfacing them in different ways. So one of these ways is the Darwin Correspondence Project website, which we're continuing to manage. That puts the letters in the context of articles that were written by the editors over many years and educational activities for specific ages and according on different topics. We also surface our transcriptions on the Cambridge University Digital Library from exactly the same files for anything that we hold in Cambridge and have put in our collection. We run epsilon.ac.uk, which is Epistles of Science for the Long 19th Century. And that's where we, again, use these same XML files, but we nest them in a wider set of data. So we put them up along with the correspondence of other scientific figures in the 19th century, such as Alfred Russel Wallace and Faraday, to name just a few. And we also have some GitHub repositories that let us make the data immediately available for download. So you can get sections of the Darwin Correspondence Project data. There's metadata of several of the Epsilon projects, and we've recently launched what we're calling a data deposit toolbox, especially for correspondence projects that are just getting started and want some pointers on what to do with the data if they want to give it to us. Obviously, we've had a lot of challenges coming from legacy data that was originally intended only for print. The markup was originally only representational, so it would tell you that something should be in italics, but it didn't tell you if that thing should be in italics because it was a species name, because it was underlined, or any of the other reasons. In some cases, italic in the original. Of course, TEI does give us that capacity, so we're having to go back and kind of retrospectively think about whether we want to indicate that something is a species name that happens to be italic instead of just something that's italic in the text. And having to do all of this stuff as additional layers onto the 50-year-old data set's been a bit of a challenge. Also, it would be really nice to connect to more external authorities, but a lot of the people in particular don't exist in any external authorities. Many people are only important, are only present in our data set because they wrote to Darwin. They don't necessarily exist elsewhere in the historical record in a kind of way that lets us have anything else to connect to. And then, of course, there's all the challenges many of you are familiar with in dealing with historic taxonomies. But those are really our goals for the future. So our next imminent plans are to add more data to Epsilon, refine our pipelines so that we can take in more different types of correspondence. And our really big next plan is to actively harvest the data for natural history information and be able to make something much more useful out of this really heterogeneous set of information. Those are our sites. Thank you.
I didn't see the stop sign being waved, so the lightning talks are off to a good start. Next up, we have Gerwin Kasperek from the University Library Johann Christian Senckenberg.
Good afternoon. I would like to present some considerations about the data which are contained in the biodiversity literature. We also had that today. Which is, and why it is so difficult to mobilize these data. Why is it important? I have to find the next slide, please. Okay. Biodiversity research is increasingly data-driven. Large amounts of data are needed, and in order to analyze trends, it's important to have data over long historical periods. And compared to other components of a data ecosystem, literature could provide information about large quantities of individuals, of populations, of places, and it covers rather long time periods. The DeSantis roadmap, also mentioned, is a very significant step and emphasizes why it is so urgent to raise the treasure chests of data contained in the literature. With our project BioFit, we also work in this direction with a focus on the Central European literature, which is mostly in German. The BioFit project is aiming at improving the accessibility of this segment by utilizing approaches such as natural language processing, semantic enrichment of full texts, and extraction of structured information from unstructured texts. That's what we mean when we say mobilizing data. BioFit is being carried out by 3 partners, the Senckenberg Society of Nature Research, the Text Technology Lab of Goethe University, and the University Library in Frankfurt, where I come from. Project funding comes from the DFG. Now, what are the main challenges? Natural language is very diverse. There are so many different ways to express just one piece of information. Natural language often has complex grammatical structures. Terminology is not standardized. There are synonyms, there are vernacular and scientific names and terms, and so on. A prominent example is biological nomenclature, but the problem goes much further than that. So let's take a closer look at a typical example from the German language literature, a botanical article published 1969. The article has been digitized from a printed volume, so almost inevitably there will be OCR errors, such as the one highlighted here, which could make it difficult to recognize a species name. Synonyms are a common challenge. This case here is quite easy to resolve because we have databases that can tell that currently the correct name is Epipactis atrorubens. However, we see in this case the author abbreviated the genus name, and in other genera the same abbreviation can also occur. For example, there is a species of worm and there is a species of fungus and so on, which are also abbreviated E. rubiginosa. You need to consider the content to clearly identify which species is meant. Here is another example of synonymy. The genus name Liparis is not only a biological name, but also a toponym. for a river in Turkey, a lake in Canada, and so on. A more prominent example is the designation Paris, which is not only a genus of plants or a city in Texas, but also a city in France. In linguistics, co-reference occurs when two or more expressions refer to the same object. This example shows the two expressions Coeloglossum viride and Coeloglossum. It is clear for human readers that in the latter case, the author has just dispensed with the longer designations out of economy, but is nevertheless referring to the species Coeloglossum viride. And there are many other types of co-reference, which are not easy for computers to resolve. My last example of a challenge is specific to German and to other Germanic languages, except for English. We have compounds in German which sometimes can be very long, and they often are made up spontaneously, depending on the need in a certain context. These compounds are quite hard to understand for machines, and you cannot make up a dictionary of all compounds occurring in natural language in Germany. So, what I have shown to you is only a small selection of possible sources of error. You see, a lot can go wrong. We think it is very important to involve computational linguistic competence, that is, to work together with people who are not just biologists or librarians, but who are advanced experts in computational linguistics. We need to imply the most advanced natural language processing, the most advanced terminology backbones, and the latest language models, and also large language models, but we have to do this with caution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerwin. Leave those there for a second. Oh. You had more slides going. We're not that strict on the time. Well, no, we are that strict on the time. I shouldn't have said that. Next up, we're going to hear about activating the BHL for storytelling and teaching from Yota Batsaki, forgive me, Yota, from Dumbarton Oaks, Harvard University.
Good afternoon, and many thanks to the organizers and presenters. I'll share how we draw on BHL to tell complex, engaging stories about how plants have shaped human cultures through our digital platform, the Plant Humanities Lab. Dumbarton Oaks is a Harvard Research Center, museum, and historic garden in Washington, D.C., as well as a Center for Garden and Landscape Studies. And our rare book collection holds many rare and unique works on botany and botanical art, and we joined BHL as an affiliate in 2023 and are actively digitizing. Our engagement with BHL reflects a shift in our thinking. Instead of viewing our collections mainly through the lens of human design, since 2018, our Plant Humanities initiative has put plants at the center as biocultural agents that shape human histories. The lab, here we go, embodies this approach. It currently features nearly 50 peer-reviewed, illustrated case histories of plants, touching on topics like food security, biodiversity loss, histories of colonialism and enslavement, and the spiritual and religious significance of plants. We seek to model how to integrate diverse primary sources, from herbarium specimens to museum objects, into the cultural histories of plants. On the right, you can see lab essays that draw on BHL resources, and I'll briefly highlight 3 examples: a herbal, a botanical illustration, and a travel narrative. The cacao narrative traces how cacao, domesticated in South America and deeply rooted in Mesoamerican cosmology, medicine, and political economy, functioned as both sacred substance and currency long before Europeans arrived. The narrative contrasts indigenous botanical knowledge, as glimpsed, for example, in the 1550s Badianus manuscript by Nahua scholars, with John Parkinson's 1640 herbal Theatrum Botanicum, where he notes the Nahuatl root of the name chocolate, but offers a duplicative account of the plant based on second-hand reports. This herbal helps show the complex, unequal ways New World plant knowledge circulated in early modern Europe before cacao became a global commodity. By contrast, our Heliconia narrative by John Kress explores how the color and shape of Heliconia attract both the hummingbirds that pollinate it and the humans who have transplanted it worldwide. The striking image from Curtis's Botanical Magazine records the flowering of a Heliconia in a private collection in Vauxhall in August 1800. The description of Heliconia here as a stove plant opens a window into the technology and craft required to grow it, and onto botanical illustration as a way to publicize his horticultural feats and spark the desires of other gardeners and collectors. The third narrative I want to share uses Mark Catesby's Natural History of Carolina to show how enslaved Africans' expertise is both central to and erased from accounts of Carolina rice. Catesby's reference to the hoe and to rice being pounded in large wooden mortars and pestles by slaves points to specific West African tools and gendered labor that made wetland rice cultivation possible. This essay models how travel narratives like Catesby's in the BHL can be read against the grain to reveal how enslaved people's horticultural knowledge and agricultural practices were integral to transforming American landscapes and foodways. These glimpses show how BHL materials are central to the stories we tell about plants and people. Many lab essays are written by graduate students in our summer program who come from disciplines in the humanities, scientists, and performing arts, and who are trained to work with special collections, including digital repositories such as BHL. Our goal is for the lab to serve as a resource for faculty and students in plants and people courses, as well as for the public, and we test its classroom use in our annual faculty residency. You see here 3 past participants, where we gather feedback from instructors in fields ranging from biology to art history. To close, I want to thank our current core team, including our developer, Ron Snyder, and the many students, fellows, interns, and faculty who have contributed to the lab. And please visit the site and share your feedback and how we can leverage BHL more in these narratives. Thank you.
Another wonderful and wonderfully timed lightning talk, thank you, which makes it all the more unfair that we placed Lauren in the middle of the road to try and get out. We're doing okay. Let me introduce next, please, Lauren Hughes from the Natural History Museum in London, talking to us about the World Register of Marine Species and BHL.
Thank you very much. So the World Register of Marine Species began in 2007, so a similar timeline, and like BHL, it's an aggregator of knowledge. The World Register is seen as an authoritative classification and catalogue of marine names and follows international standards. Its main goal is to help marine biological science via a global marine species inventory. It's hosted in Flanders Marine Institute, also known as BLISS. There's 422 edits a day, so a running log happens. This equals an edit every minute. This is done by these absolutely glorious people. So there's over 350 editors and 500 if you add our thematic editors all over the world. As you can see here, representation is fantastic. Our editors are volunteers, so they're giving their time willingly because they believe in this platform. What's most important about this goodwill is that it's something understood about time. So as a scientist, if you're publishing in a high-end journal at the moment, you don't want to be referencing anything more than 5 years old. But as a taxonomist, it is normal within our profession to use and access literature that can be up to 200 years old, and that's part of our regular practice. So as such, things like lithostats and photocopiers, dare I say that at a library event, were a really big step change for us as taxonomists. And of course, the internet was fantastic because it gave us the opportunity to talk to each other in real time and talk about half-fermented ideas, limited evidence ideas. Why is it always a broken species that presents the most novel feature that you've ever seen in your career? And it gave us the ability to converse about that. So at the moment, the worms is endorsed as part of the UN Decade of Oceans, which is an amazing opportunity. So there are several platforms and projects that they're delivering under that, and I won't go into them all here. Each year on worms, worms is also has a series of data managers and it has a steering committee that meets several times a year, of which I was a member last year. So worms over time, it started out at about 1,700 species. At the moment, there's about 2,200 new species described every year. Everybody's going to ask what the spike is. That is a particularly prevalent ostracod worker who did an amazing output there. It's just fantastic. You can't not mention that. And again, citation rate is fantastic. The amount of data that's happening, you can see here the graph is just of things that we have GPS position for. There's much more. So worms is also feeding into traits as well. So you can see here there's genetic information, ecological information, we've got information about species, literature I'll come back to of course, and the thematic platforms that it generates as well. So at the moment the total visitor years is very, very high and has always been increasing. So what comes next? Definitely maximalism. More is more. So literature distributions and type data are still progressing. It's always an assumption of worms that everything is done. That's not actually quite the case. Different thematic groups are further or larger ahead. Others are still developing. So a bit of a myth that all of the species are there. This is something that we're working towards. But stability and integrity are there. So BHL lies significantly in this journey. As you can see, our literature is increasing and will continue to increase, and a large proportion of the literature is available through a BHL link, so very fortunate that there's a way forward. But what would we like to see in future? It is definitely that knowledge graph and looking at AI. You can't get away from it. There's opportunities. So we've been looking at grants that see a roadmap. Where are the biggest gap opportunities in literature that's not already there? With so many editors across the world, some are very tech savvy, already looking at those opportunities within their groups, but not at whole scale. I think so. Worms is a global content in terms of what they hold, but also in usage, and it has all data that stores information that contributes in the broadest possible way. VLIS has a commitment to be permanently open, so Worms is online and accessible. It's also committed to have both human users and machine-to-machine communication, so it was fantastic to see other people reference that. I'll keep the talk short there, other than to say there is definitely aspirations to look at what's happening here today, and thank you very much for hosting.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, our next speakers are Amanda Boczar and Sydney Jordan. Before I invite Amanda and Sydney to the microphone, though, I'd just like to say, BHL has gone through a moment of crisis, and it's coming through that, in a really positive way. And all of the comments of support were really, really appreciated. But when an institution comes forward during that process and says, we actually want to be a member and we want to play a part in making this successful, that's incredibly fantastic. It's really meaningful and we're really grateful. So I'm really, really pleased to invite colleagues from one of those institutions, one of our newest members, the University of South Florida, Amanda and Sydney, to tell us about how they're going to get involved with BHL.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I'm Sydney, and this is Amanda. So this is our first BHL Annual Meeting and BHL Day as members. We've only just gotten started, but we hope we'll have much to offer in the months and years ahead. Today, we'd like to tell you about our focus on growing collections, curating content relevant to BHL, our shared initiatives, and some highlights that showcase how our work may be relevant to the community. All right, so USF is a state institution whose library resources and physical special collections are open to the public, and all of our reformatted and born digital items hosted on our digital repository are openly accessible. Although environmental material was organically part of our rare book holdings, USF Libraries began actively pursuing Florida-centered archival collections in 2016. As shown on the mission statement on the screen, our FLEN program branches from the hyperlocal to both national and international networks, as reflected by our largest subsection, our ornithological papers, and the inherent migratory patterns of those subjects. So in our first decade, we now house approximately 40 archival collections and have nearly completed a substantial processing backlog. Finding aids include scope and content notes at each folder level, as well as the item level for what BHL would consider a book-like object, such as those data-rich field notes. As a strategic initiative, our collecting plan has been digitization minded from the outset, with these expectations laid out in our MOUs with donors. Our standard donor agreements now include permissions related to digitization for intellectual property rights holders, as well as a menu of optional Creative Commons licenses. Our next step will be adding in language for inclusion into BHL and securing permissions retroactively when possible. So with the aid of a current grant from our local estuary program and hiring of scientific interns, both in undergraduate and graduates, we'll be able to pursue more intensive digitization and description, which will enhance our current profile of more than 3.5 million downloads of the nearly 110,000 environmental records currently available in our repository.
So I wanted to do the fun part and talk about a couple of our recent success stories and things that have allowed us to continue this program. So one of them is that we very recently have been collaborating a lot more with our colleagues at the Audubon Societies. We have an MOU where we are the repository for all the sanctuaries across the state, and we're working on building better relationships with National Audubon in the United States. And so we were working with our colleagues at the Florida Audubon Everglades Science Center related to a growth of a I think it was a military base, but there was a growth of development that was supposed to take place over flamingo breeding grounds. And they had a feeling that in their records at the sanctuary, they thought that they had nesting records that would show that flamingos were native to Florida, because the developers were arguing they were not a native species. They could move the nests, kill the nests, and move on. And so we were able to quickly take those materials, digitize those materials, OCR them, and provide them with enough data that they were able to not only stop the development, they were able to have flamingos designated as a native species. And now, very recently, flamingos are now our state bird in Florida, which is fun. And another one, also, as Sydney said, also bird related. A few years ago, I was working with our Florida Ornithological Society partners, and I heard that the wonderful SORA resource, the Searchable Ornithological Research Archive at University of New Mexico, was having some sustainability issues on a Drupal server. And so they did not have the funds to kind of continue and reformat this. So I got them in contact with our digital scholarship team. We were able to take over that collection. There was 46 journals at the takeover. Currently, there's about 87,000 issues we've been loading it for about 2 years. We're just wrapping up the finishing of that migration. But during that process, we've already had 2.5 million downloads of those articles. They're extremely well used. There's a ton of research data in those materials, and we have active ongoing communications with the journal editors. And so we're trying to secure permissions to get all of those into BHL, which we're excited about. In the middle of all this, we have been dealing with making our materials much more accessible due to the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, Title II rulings in the United States. And they were recently delayed for a year, but we were already well underway. And that includes making text-based alternatives to a lot of the work that we're doing. So we have just decided to go all in on this. We're providing transcripts to everything handwritten in our archive, 69,000 pages of material. We're using an AI-enhanced software called QDocs that is on top of a layer in our AWS servers. And so we have a team of about 15 students working part-time in our office who are giving a human review of these materials. And I was recently able to work with a group at the College of Marine Science at USF, as well as their partners across the United States. And we put together a study looking at tidal data across records from like the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, and they were able to publish studies on how this software was able to help them conduct their research at a much faster pace. So we're pretty excited about that. So finally, to look forward, we're looking forward to working with the BHL tech team, helping to install that local installation of Macaw at USF and providing some regional support as a hub. We're also hopeful that we'll be able to collaborate on solutions to streamline the integration of archival sources, because the primary bulk of what we have is archival of what we'd like to add to BHL. We do also have a large collection of books as well. And then my personal dream project would be reviving that photo archive. I know it's not really on the plan right now, but if that was something that was possible, we have tens of thousands of photos that we think are really rich resources. I have decades and decades of coral reef research that is documented through photographs that you're able to see really stark declines in coral reefs across the Caribbean. And so getting those out there to a broader audience, I think would be really helpful. So between the work that we've been able to start in Florida, the networks that I've created, I recently did a grant with CLEAR to work on resiliency and build a network of libraries focused on resiliency and research in this space in the United States. And so I'm hoping to take those and bridge them into the work that we do with BHL. And like Sydney said, we are just getting started, but we're really excited to be here. So thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Amanda and Sydney, and thank you to all of our speakers in the first session. We now come to the Q&A part. I should just say, in an event that is focused so much on technology and innovation, it was, I guess, either ironic or inevitable that we would have some difficulties online with the tech. So for those of you who are listening and would like to ask a question, I am told that the way to do that is to make an announcement using the Q&A feature. So you should have an option to make an announcement. It's really not as scary as that sounds in the Q&A feature, and then our colleague in the room will read that out. I have a colleague to my right, David, who you've met on the stage, who will hand microphones to the speakers, and colleagues on either side of the room, Martin over there and Ben just there. So those of you in the room, if you have a question, please do wait for the microphone to arrive before responding. Would anyone like to start us off? We'll look to the room first. Siobhan.
Hi, this is a question about the Darwin Correspondence presentation. A comment was made that there wasn't an authority database for linked open data for your correspondence people. Have you considered Wikidata? Because if they wrote to Darwin, I regard them notable for the purposes of Wikidata. So have you considered that? Yes. Is the short answer. Yes, it's on our medium-term list of things that we would like to explore. I think the thing that's been holding back a bit is partly that we're also working on other things than Darwin, and partly that I was worried about the notability factor and wanted to look into it a bit more. Amazing, let's talk.
Any more questions in the room at the moment? There's one just there. I'm not sure this is... sorry, if we could just wait for the microphone, sorry, just there. Thank you.
Sorry, my name is Robert Rice. I was recently doing an article on some old French prints from the 18th century by a chap called Boczar, and I found the BHL online facility enormously useful, except in French. And I found that on the other hand, the Gallica website, operated by the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, enormously useful. But their website is, the interface is nothing like as good as BHL's is. Have you got any plans for, we've also heard from a German contributor, for sort of internationalizing the database?
Would anyone from BHL like to respond to that? I guess much will depend on our membership and the materials that they have to digitize will be one part of that. But does someone from the tech team want to respond to the?
Can I?
Joel, thanks.
Hi, I'm Joel Richard from the tech team and tech coordinator for BHL. Yes, on a personal level, yes, I would like to see BHL have an internationalized user interface. There's not much we can do with the content of BHL because we're not going to translate an English volume into French, so to speak. But we do want to embrace the larger world and have BHL appear in your native language whenever possible. And I think that's on our plan for the future, yes.
Yeah, I mean, my question is that there's a lot of resources out there, on an enormous number on the French website. But you've got to go there and you've got to penetrate through it to find the articles you're interested in. And
I am from France. Can I
somehow or other reach out to BNF and get them integrated? I don't know what mechanism you've got for recruiting.
I think we have another comment just there.
Thank you. As the, I guess, honorary holder of BHL's history in the room, I can say that a multilingual interface has been part of our plans, our grand plans for a long time, or maybe it's our wishes. It's not really in our plans. We would love to. The unfortunate reality of BHL is that it is very shoestring in terms of its resources, and its partnerships, while extremely invaluable, are carried by the institutional priorities. So BHL serves as a collaborator in many ways, but our ability to sort of mandate what our partners do or where they invest their time and energy is limited. So I believe, and I don't know myself, but I believe we have reached out to the Gallica folks back during the BHL Europe days many, many years ago. And it's a matter of taking sort of two different bespoke platforms and trying to integrate them. And that's not come to fruition yet. But yes, we would love to. If anyone knows of a benefactor who's interested in providing resources to fund a multilingual platform, the modernization of our website, the integration of a variety of content out there, we would love to live up to what I feel is a shared vision of a biodiversity literature repository that really captures everything. But we are struggling to sort of find a sustainable future at the moment. So
well, I'll ask a question at the French end and see if we can get any.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. Yes, shameless plugs, please. Yeah. Call your friends.
And never mind if anyone knows a benefactor. If anyone is a benefactor, then please do also speak to us. Do we have any questions online at all? Great. Thanks, Ben. At least one person has braved making an announcement.
Okay, so this is a general question to all speakers, any speakers, and it is how much calculation power do you estimate you need to run AI text and data mining or other analysis on BHL documents? And they're asking in relation to a new project called AI Factories, which is trying to find out the actual needs of different disciplines for server and computational power to scale future data centers.
So how much calculation power to run AI and data mining on BHL? I can see someone pointing at Ben, and Ben has the microphone.
Yeah, wow, what a question. I mean, a lot. I mean, it kind of depends on exactly what kind of computation you're trying to do over it. In terms of the OCR, I can put it into costs, which is how we've estimated it rather than processing time. So for the re-OCRing the entire BHL corpus, through Mistral, we had a quote from Mistral for £35,000. So that's the entire corpus. The actual graph generation, the entity extraction, we estimated the cost of that at 80,000 US dollars. In terms of like processing time and capacity, I would need to go back and look at the figures, but maybe I could post an answer to that question? Okay, here it is. Thank you.
Can't believe you didn't have that off the top of your head there.
Yeah, instead of, because Ben just mentioned it about the cost of the OCR, because we don't actually have many methods to actually cut down the OCR cost. But for the taxon extractions about the knowledge graph, we did actually experiment like different ways. So the one that we present is actually the most accurate one, with the cloud one. So it come up to the problem is actually the cost. But there's another way that actually for alternative, like if they want to actually do that more locally, is we do actually have like options for smaller size of the open model, so which is the GPT, I think 12, yeah, the 2 billion version, and also the 12 billion version as well. So one thing that like if they really want to do similar experiments, like it's actually a more cost-effective option for BHL as well, is we can try to train the models with separate, like instead of like using one model for more regular like BHL corpus, we just like divide it into different tax. So one individual model for the taxon, and like for institution, humans, so aka people, and also locality, and this is more easier to standardize it, the output, and like more like cost like sustainability like for it, because it's actually a local model, so it's much more easier for training, and the cost for this one will be cut down to like I think it's just really huge, like cut down for that. And yeah, I think that's another option. We do actually have other options, but like we did quite a lot of like experiments on the taxon extraction accuracy. So we still thinking that our model is like currently best performer, like our bits or the other things. I hope that I answered that question.
Great, thanks, Harris. We maybe have time for one more from online, if there is.
Yeah, there's another one. So thank you to all the speakers for the illuminating talks. Question for Rod Page. What was the name of the scanning tent you used for imaging literature?
The scanning tent is called ScanTent. It's Transcribus, which I think is based in Austria. Does a lot of work on handwriting recognition, and for something like 225 euros, it is yours.
Thanks very much. Any more questions in the room? I don't see any hands, which might be for the best, because my colleague is getting slightly twitchy with the stop sign, and it would be awful if I was the one that ran over. We're just about to go into the break. We will come back at 4 p.m. From the break, but before we do, could we please thank our speakers once again. Two presentations in this part of BHL Day. First of all, joining us from New Zealand and Berlin, I would like to welcome, please, Siobhan Leachman and Sabine van Meering.
So good afternoon, I'm Siobhan Leachman. I'm a Wikimedian from New Zealand, and I'm also a volunteer for the Biodiversity Heritage Library.
Good afternoon, my name is Sabine van Meering. I'm a biologist and data scientist based at Museum für Naturkunde Berlin, the Natural History Museum in Berlin, Germany. We would like to thank the organizers of BHL Day 2026 and our host, the Natural History Museum, for having us. We're here to present on a project that our group of researchers, including some from the Natural History Museum and some from Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, since we undertook since the pandemic. The focus of our study were the women after whom plant genera have been named. Yeah, showing a different one. Yeah. Our project was inspired by a 2021 tweet by Carmen Ulloa, a member of our group from the Missouri Botanic Garden. She asked the question, which plant genera names honor women? And initially this appeared to be an easy question with a simple answer, but discussions inspired by this tweet soon revealed that the dataset needed to answer this question did not exist. And this is how our international and multidisciplinary research project was born. Here's a list of the participants of this project, in this research project, and the institutions they are affiliated with. You can see our project was an international effort, and we're lucky to have some of our co-collaborators in the room with us today. Before we move on, we want to define a few terms. First, we would like to make sure everyone is aware of what a genus is. It is a taxonomic category that ranks above the species but below a family. While there are millions of species, there are only about 15 to 25,000 flowering plant genera or genus names. Of those, around 5,000 are named after people. To have a genus named after you is a rare and high honor. One of the main questions we wanted to answer was how many of those genera are named in honor of women or female beings.
We also want to clarify what Wikidata is. Now, this is because Wikidata is where we placed all our research data as we were actually researching it. Wikidata is the sister project to Wikipedia. While Wikipedia provides text, Wikidata stores structured, linked data that's human and machine readable. We chose to add our data to Wikidata because anyone can create and enrich Wikidata items. We could easily add our data about the women, the genera named after those women, the authors of those names, and the publications that did the naming to that database knowledge base. And we could create links between each of these elements of data. We also loved that Wikidata is consistently being enriched and improved by other editors. So as soon as we created or enriched our items relevant to our project, other editors then became our unknowing collaborators. They helped us enrich and link our items to other data in Wikidata. We prioritise Wikidata because it also links to multiple other databases. And this means we're able to link our items to the Biodiversity Heritage Library, to the International Plant Names Index, or IPNI, and also to Tropicus. We were aware that all the data in Wikidata is CC0 licensed, and so could be reused by anyone for anything. And this aligned with our group's aim to share our research data as widely as possible. And finally, we used Wikidata because once we had completed our research, we could then query Wikidata, asking questions that might be really difficult to answer via any other platform. Now, ours was a collaboration of women researchers who had complementary areas of expertise. Some of us were expert botanists, taxonomists, or botanical historians, while others were experienced in improving botanical databases or catalogues. Importantly, Sabine and I were active in Wikidata, and as well as this expert botanical and Wikidata knowledge, we also needed access to botanical literature. We needed to verify the original descriptions of the plant genera, that is the protologues, to confirm both the genera names and that they were named after our women. And unsurprisingly, access to much of this literature was provided by the Biodiversity Heritage Library. Now, we were all motivated to contribute to this project because we wanted to focus on women and to highlight their contributions. We were very broad in our definition of women, including people who identified as women and also female beings from myth and legend. And our intention was to amplify women's contributions to botany, so we didn't work on plant genera named after men. And just a word about women and female beings. We acknowledge that gender is a social construct. And for this research, our statements on who was a woman or female being were based on how either a living person publicly acknowledged their gender, for example, through pronoun use, or for deceased women and female beings, their implied gender was inferred either through recorded pronoun use or gender statements in secondary sources. To aid Wikidata queries, this perceived gender statements were added to Wikidata. So this is a visualization of our research workflow, and it shows the resources we used in the dataset creation process and the push-pull of data between those resources and Wikidata. Now the arrowheads indicate the flow of information, and lines with two arrows heads indicate where the information was both pulled from the outside sources and also pushed back to them, improving those sources during the course of our project. And you can see BHL actually played a major role in empowering our research, and that our research has helped enrich BHL's catalogue, but more on that later.
The first thing we had to do was to find the women. We were lucky that a publication existed that was a great starting point. Lotte Burkhardt had already done a lot of research on algae, fungi, and plant genera, and the people they were named after. But this publication was in prose form, covered more groups than we were researching, and also required confirmation. Our group comprises several world experts in botany, and they have in-depth knowledge of angiosperms or flowering plant genera, and were able to add their expertise in addition to Burkhardt's list. We also reached out to the botanical community, and as soon as folk became aware of our work, people couldn't wait to tell us of the genera named after women they knew about. Obviously, one of our main priorities was to ensure that the women we were researching were actually in Wikidata, creating digital anchors, stable or persistent, unambiguous identifiers for them. When we started our project, in Wikidata there were only links between 44 women and the plant genera named in their honor. So we started off by creating or enriching items for our women in Wikidata, releasing the results of our research as we went. Whenever possible, we were also connected the items of these women to other databases. For example, by adding links to the BHL Creator ID, if they had publications in BHL, to the VIAF ID, a global library database identifier, and ORCID, a researcher identifier for living people. We also linked to botanical databases such as the Harvard Index of Botanists, EPNI, and Tropicus. If the women were published authors themselves, we also linked their items to any of their publications they were already available in Wikidata.
Now, BHL was vital in assisting with our research into these women. BHL provided access to publications that provided information on our women, such as their birth and death dates, where they worked, the type of work they undertook, their collaborators, the research expeditions they participated in, and so much more. And we've already mentioned how BHL provided a catalogue creator identifier, which we were able to add to our women's Wikidata items to help link the women who had publications in BHL and held in BHL and put those identifiers into Wikidata. Now, to give you an example of the women we were researching, here's Matilda Smith. She was the first official artist of the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew and was a talented and prolific scientific illustrator. She's a personal favourite of mine because she illustrated Thomas Cheeseman's book, Illustrations of the New Zealand Flora, which is also available in BHL. Currently, Matilda has 2 plant genera named in her honour.
We also had to research the genera named in honor of those women. Again, we wanted to add the data found to the appropriate genus item in Wikidata. BHL provides a taxonomic name search that was really helpful to us. We searched for each genus in BHL, and BHL provided a list of publications where that name was mentioned. We could then use the information in these publications to enrich the plant genera Wikidata items and also to use the publications as supporting reference for that data. So similar to what we have heard about the evidence layer in the planetary knowledge base. By the way, the genus featured in this screenshot of the BHL search is Talbotiella. Fabaceae, a genus of Fabaceae of the legumes, and is named in honor of the ethnographer and botanical collector Dorothy Talbot and her husband. Dorothy was also a talented scientific illustrator. This is an illustration of hers here at the Natural History Museum. Recently, a paper has been published on it by researchers affiliated with the NHM and Kew. Frustratingly, despite her husband being an avid photographer, we were unable to track down a public domain or openly licensed photograph of Dorothy during our research. And we frequently have this problem of this difficulty for many of our women. Therefore, we continue to be on the lookout for images of our women we can reuse in Wiki and generally to highlight the women's contributions to science.
But back to finding the protologues or original descriptions of the genera. By far the majority of protologues we were looking for, over 60%, were accessible via BHL. And having access to these publications made our life so much easier. It most definitely saved us time, and it meant that the researchers in our group who did not have access to botanical libraries could still contribute to the research effort. Now, where the protologues were not in BHL, our wonderful colleagues spent time at their amazing libraries of their institutions tracking down those publications. And here you can see Sandy and Carmen hard at work researching information on the genera and the women we were interested in. Now, one of the main reasons we were spending so much time on these publications is, again, we are looking for proof that the genus was named in honour of the women we were researching. Now, sometimes this was easy, and you can see here specifically stated in the protologue that they were named after them. But sometimes it was not. We had to have, if we did have some sort of trace of the woman in the protologue, we had to undertake further research to find her. Where the protologue didn't link to the woman at all, we had to undertake further research to work out why the genus was believed to be named in her honour. Now, in these examples, Gertrude Lauterbach was the wife of the esteemed colleague of the author. And for Anne Monson, Sandy had to research further into the correspondence of Linnaeus to find proof of the naming of that genus in her honour.
Where possible, we tried to ensure the protologues had Wikidata items we could then use as a reference. This verified our research within Wikidata, but also left a documentation trail showing evidence of our collaborative data curation. Where possible, we also ensured the protologue Wikidata items were linked to the Wikidata items of the authors of those genus names in the protologues. So we were weaving a web of interlinked data. Our aim was also to highlight to Wikidata users that many of the protologues are accessible via BHL. So where possible, we made sure the BHL catalog or BHL page ID was added to the protologue Wikidata item. So this means Wikidata users can now just click on that number and will be taken directly to the appropriate page in BHL. And this can, of course, also, these links can be reused by other tools. As well as linking everything in Wikidata, we also verified the data in IPNI, the International Plant Names Index, and in Tropicus. These are two pivotal databases used in the botany world, by the botany world. A member of our group, Heather Linden, had previously worked at IPNI and regularly emailed her former colleagues with our queries and updates. Carmen, based at the Missouri Botanic Garden, undertook the Tropicus database curation. We shared a variety of data about the women, the genera, the protologues, and the taxon authors with these two databases, always attempting to make our research as widely disseminated as possible and available to the communities that would find it the most useful. This included ensuring that IPNI and Tropicus added links to BHL, thus making BHL and its content better connected to the wider biodiversity knowledge ecosystem. We want to emphasize that we aimed to do this as soon as we could during the research process. We weren't waiting until we published our papers, nor until the databases incorporated the finalized data set. We were proactively ensuring this linking. Reuse and incorporation of data was happening as part of our research process. Thus, it was a truly open science effort, jointly curating a linked open dataset.
Now, adding our data into Wikidata has also helped BHL directly. BHL can add the Wikidata identifier to both its BHL creator and bibliographic pages. BHL's then got the option of using that Wikidata item to extract a selection of other identifiers to add to its catalogue. So on the left, you can see that the BHL has a creator page for the American botanist Agnes Chase. It also lists several other identifiers on that page, some of which have been ingested as a result of also being on her Wikidata item. You can also see the bibliographic page for an edition of a work held in BHL. This too has had a Wikidata item added to it. Now, I am sure many of you are still wanting to know the answer to our original question. How many of the approximately 5,000 genera named for people were named for women and female beings? Well, as at the 24th of October 2023, the answer was 728. We published our paper in December of 23, outlining how we created our data set, and we went on to publish a second paper doing a little more in-depth analysis into the data set we created. We just quickly want to share with you some of the results and also thank Harris and Sarah for their data analysis contributions to our research.
Our research showed that more plant genera are named for real women as opposed to mythical female beings. We also listed the women or female beings who had the most number of genera named in their honor. You can see at the top of the table is Daphne and our group's personal favorite, Medusa, both from Greek mythology. We also analyzed the naming of genera after mythical women versus real women over time. You can see that over time, more and more genera have been named after real women rather than goddesses or nymphs. We looked at the real women in more detail and attempted to analyze their occupations. Now, not all the women had one occupation, but you can see over time the naming of genera after female nobles or patrons has reduced, and more women with green occupations, such as being a botanist or botanical collector, are having plant genera named in their honor.
So in conclusion, as a result of our research, our group published 2 papers, as well as several newsletter articles and blogs. We've enriched multiple databases with our research data, given multiple presentations in many locations around the world, including this one. But most importantly, what started out as a research collaboration became a group of friends united in highlighting women's contributions to botany. Our research showed that women are underrepresented in plant naming at the generic level. We recommend that those namings, species and genera be explicit when naming in honour of women, and we want to emphasise that BHL was absolutely invaluable to our research. So thank you to all the people and institutions that contribute to this magnificent digital library.
Thank you very much, Siobhan and Sabine. Okay, so the BHL Annual Meeting is this year hosted by 2 institutions, the Natural History Museum here in London, but also Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew. And where we started with a presentation by NHM colleagues, I think it's fitting that we conclude with a colleague from Kew. Please welcome Christopher Kreutzer.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be speaking here at BHL Day 2026. The talk I'm going to be giving today is based partly on work done within the recently concluded digitization project at RBG Kew, and partly on research that I've carried out since then. Before starting, I would like to acknowledge the assistance provided both by my colleagues who worked on the digitization project and by archivists at both Kew and elsewhere, including here at the NHM. This talk builds on previous and current research in this area by myself and a colleague at Kew, James Bren. We looked at the collection of plants by soldiers from a number of different battlefields and campaign theatres during the First World War. This talk did not cover the wild collections, but instead focuses on the evidence for cultivation both during and after the war of seeds and other materials collected during the war. As well as Salonika itself, locations that feature include Kew's experimental ground located near the herbarium building. The photograph here is of the Hunter House entrance to the herbarium. Material was also cultivated in gardens around the UK, such as in Dorset. The period I cover ranges from 1914 to around 1926, the war years and the following decade. I also look at the biographical background of those collecting, distributing and cultivating specimens. Throughout this talk, I consider to what extent searches of BHL texts can help with writing, uncovering or recovering these histories. Salonika, today the Greek city of Thessaloniki, was one of the quieter fronts of the war, with the geography shown here in a scenic illustration from a soldier's scrapbook. This area, Greek Macedonia, is on the border with what is today North Macedonia, as well as Bulgaria and Serbia. These areas being part of the wider Balkan Peninsula region. The seeds and bulbs brought back from here and cultivated in the UK can be located as digitized specimen herbarium specimens at Kew. I will describe how I widened the search for cultivated specimens of wartime origin, looked at BHL texts and other sources, and worked up some case studies, finishing with conclusions drawn, lessons learned, and outlines of future work. This examination of cultivation history begins with a set of systemic lists of wartime collections published in 1918, 1919 and 1920 in the Kew Journal titled Bulletin of Miscellaneous Information. These lists were published by Kew botanist William Bertram Turrell, who had served in the Royal Army Medical Corps in Salonika. As the 4-year Kew digitisation project came to a conclusion in 2026, a digital curation project to locate and correct records was carried out for a data set of around 1,500 specimens collected by Turrell and others. In theory, locating and matching these published records with others with digitised specimens should have been easy, but in practice, some were difficult to locate. One challenge is changes in taxonomic identification since 1920. Name changes, synonyms, were not too difficult to resolve, but when a specimen had received a completely new determination, this made it more difficult to find. This ongoing process has currently matched around 90% of the original list. Within these records, a subset of cultivation records was identified. This subset, examples of which are shown on this slide, consisted of 75 numbered seed packets brought back to Kew from Salonika by Turrell. Not all the seeds were cultivated or published. The examples across the bottom show capsules containing only seeds. These ones are Vicia, vetch, and Muscari, grape hyacinth seeds. When cultivation was successful, the resulting plants were collected by Turrell and mounted on herbarium sheets, as in the examples at top here, rough dog's tail at left, and a natural hybrid papava poppy at right. All seeds and cultivations mentioned by Turrell in his initial publications have been matched to digitised records and images, resulting in a downloadable dataset. Cultivation took place mostly in May and June 1918. Turrell had been invalided home in late 1917. This cultivation subset consists of 66 taxa in 42 genera across 18 families. One plant family, Fabaceae, the legumes, features strongly with 25 specimens. Turning to biographical sources, Ray Desmond and Nigel Hepper, the first quote on the slide here, stated in 1993 that Towell's development as a taxonomist led directly to him establishing a small experimental garden near the herbarium that he tended himself. In 1929, the second quote here, Towell himself had highlighted how this enabled him to study and grow from seeds the plants of the Balkan Peninsula, from where he had brought back 91 seed packets from a 1922 field trip. His earlier growing of seeds from Salonika should be seen in this context. Where, though, can evidence be found of others who cultivated seeds and bulbs from wartime Salonika? Widening the search started with the two specimens here, which have been located through database searches on year and locality. At left is Cistus villosus, hoary rock rose, and at right, Hippocum imberbe, sickle fruit hippocum, the latter with its very distinctive fruit. Both were labelled as from Macedonia. It quickly became clear that additional digital curation and archival research was needed. The identity of the H. Blanchard named on the label was at that point a mystery. Interrogating both the archives here at Kew and the corpus of digitized text held by the BHL helped to resolve this and establish more clearly the cultivation that had happened. In the next part of the talk, I will explain the sources used and present some case studies. The search of BHL text quickly threw up 3 publications where cultivations of plant material from wartime Salonika were being reported. One with the Gardener's Chronicle, a weekly publication founded in 1841 that contains vast amounts of horticultural news. Another with Curtis's Botanical Magazine, founded 1787, a publication centred at Kew that describes and illustrates new and interesting ornamental and exotic species of plants. The methodology adopted was to search for both Macedonia and the 2 spellings of Salonika. A semi-regular feature in the Gardener's Chronicle in the wartime years was the recurring heading Letters from Soldier Gardeners. The Salonika examples shown here show how the letter writers would give their horticultural background and military service histories. One source available through the BHL that is not listed here was mentioned earlier, the Bulletin of Miscellaneous Information, where Towell had published his list. To supplement this information, there was also biographical background which came from obituaries from non-BHL sources. I've listed 3 here. The first 2 cultivation case studies I will now show come from the pages of Curtis's Botanical Magazine. The botanical illustrations in this publication were commissioned to accompany descriptions like the one quoted here, which give details of those who collected and cultivated specimens and sent them to Kew. In this case, the description includes cultivation history. Quote, the form with red-purple flowers on the left here was received from Miss D. Blanchard, who had flowered it in her garden at Parkstone, Dorset in May 1919, her plant having originally been received from Macedonia, end quote. This woman is likely related to the H. Blanchard we encountered earlier, though the exact connection is not certain. Later in the description, cultivation and rootstock propagation at Kew is described. Other forms of this plant from Salonika are attributed to a Lady Muriel Herbert, though it is not clear whether she cultivated the plant. Lady Muriel Herbert had served in both Serbia and Salonika as a nurse. She maintained her contact with Kew after the war, living in Kenya with her husband, Dr. A.J. Jeck Blake, from where she continued to send plants to Kew. She was a co-founder of the Kenya Horticultural Society. This second illustration from Curtis's Botanical Magazine shows a species of Fritillaria. The description helped to shed more light on the Blanchards and their cultivation activity. The outline shown here is a condensed version of a longer account in a set of letters preserved in Kew's archives, where Hamilton Blanchard, the H. Blanchard from earlier, described how he raised the plant illustrated here from bulbs sent by his brother Douglas, who was serving in the army in Macedonia. This is an example where a direct link can be made between a digitized specimen, in this case K0013775586, and the scanned text and image shown here. In other words, this is linking from the BHL scan to the digitized specimen held at Kew. And both illustrations that I've shown here from Curtis's Botanical Magazine are by Matilda Smith, who featured in the previous talk. An obituary of Douglas Blanchard had more to say about this cultivation activity and the differences between the brothers. Douglas was 12 years younger than Hamilton and was around 27 at the start of the war. Despite Hamilton cultivating the bulbs his brother sent him and sending them to Kew, his interest lay elsewhere. It was Douglas who started raising seedlings using Macedonian names, and the claim is made here that the crocus and Romulia bulbs that he sent back from Macedonia still survive some 50 years later. The second quote on this slide, which was sourced by searching a BHL text, is an excellent example of how soldiers with a horticultural background responded to the flora of Salonika, desiring to take seeds and bulbs home and cultivate them. Another example of such a cultivation, also in Dorset, was more obscure. The letter attached to the specimen described bulbs sent from Macedonia, but the reverse of the letter was not visible in the digitized image. Inspection revealed the writer to be Major Hugh Blomfield Nicholson, who saw service in Salonika in his late 40s and was over 50 when the war ended. The iris specimens he sent to Kew in 1922 were from Macedonian bulbs planted 5 years earlier during the war. I have found no further trace of his gardening activity. Additional examples of such cultivations include ones found in BHL texts, specifically here the Journal of the Royal Horticultural Society of London. One of the leading figures in that society in the war was Edward Augustus Bowles. Two examples are shown here of him describing plants, quote, raised from bulbs sent from Salonika. It is not stated who sent him the bulbs. The inward goods from Salonika, the inward goods records in the archives at Kew show that Bowles sent material from Salonika to Kew in 1916, but it is difficult to trace the history further here. The other cultivation example, the images at centre and right, come many years after the war and not from Salonika. I am grateful to Kew curator botanist Laura Pierce for this find and for photographing the species sheet annotated by Terrell of a set of Gallipoli poppies. These were all grown from seed from war graves in Gallipoli and brought back to the UK by Lieutenant Colonel Frank Rogers Durham, a senior figure in the Imperial War Graves Commission. The specimen at right, shown here, was grown at a house not far from Kew's herbarium, 28 Cumberland Road, which is also shown here. This appears to have been where Durham lived. So the same seeds that were being grown by Terrell at Kew on his experimental ground were also being grown by Durham at Cumberland Road. The two sets of cultivation, 19 in total, were brought together in one folder and are now stored in the herbarium at Kew. The full extent of these war graves cultivations has not yet been established. Some of those that made these wartime collections and cultivations are obscure and hard to identify. Cross-referencing their details with BHL text can yield some answers. The first one shown here is Sergeant W.S. White, known to have been among the prize winners of a plant collecting competition organised by John Ramsbottom, who was from the Natural History Museum. It was not known who W.S. White was until a post-war article, also by a W.S. White, was found in the Gardener's Chronicle, talking about vegetable cultivation in Macedonia. The mentions in both accounts of the same military unit, while still not definitive, make it likely they are the same person. Other incomplete identifications, such as the other three shown here, have not yet been successfully resolved. One complication, as seen in the case of Miss D. Blanchard, is that her surname may have changed later due to marriage. For the soldiers, as in the two examples here, further identification is more likely if they were officers rather than private or non-commissioned officers. So in the final part of the talk, I'm going to talk about some lessons that were learned from working on the digitized records of cultivation. Locating and connecting the specimens following digitization is sometimes relatively easy, but can also be problematic. There are difficulties in reading the handwriting. Sometimes there are typographic errors in the databases and misinterpretation leading to missing data, which can make specimens harder to locate. Cultivated specimens proved sometimes particularly difficult to locate because the label would not always indicate cultivated status. And also the cultivated fields in databases are less frequently used and more errors are likely. Some other conclusions are that the databases of digitized specimens allow broad overview searches. Close examination of digital datasets allows focus on the detail. And while some level of corrections or additional curation may be needed, this depends on the level of digitization reached within a project. Some projects will have digitized fully, some will have digitized to a certain level. Some details are still obscured, for example, the reverse of letters and historic species folders annotations by curators and taxonomists are not always captured. Digitized specimens can be connected to the corpus of scanned literature, such as BHL text, some directly, others require further research and expert annotation, and this will invariably involve examination of archival records and documents, such as letters and logbooks of specimens revealed. And an additional point I want to make here is that when you have archival records that you're bringing into the mix of data, that can change the outlook completely. When that is missing from a data set, it's very difficult to do an analysis, whether human or by computer, if you've got that missing data. Further work is needed to connect and interpret digitized collections and published literature, and to establish the extent to which Turrell and others published their work on cultivating seeds from Salonica. There are a number of methods where you can formalize the links between specimens and published primary sources and secondary literature. You can use permanent identifiers and also annotations. And in databases, you can have a research tab which will link to any research that has been done on a specimen. Future case studies and research include connections between Kew and the Commonwealth All Grades Commission. And some unanswered questions are: who else grew seeds in the herbarium experimental grounds at Kew? Did any plants end up in the living collections? How extensive was Turrell's communication network with collectors and cultivators? And searches of BHL text by taxon, plant name, can be combined with locality and collector names, which is another promising possibility. This penultimate slide shows some additional sources and further reading. The accounts of vegetable and flower shows during the war, particularly an article about such activity in Salonica, which has only been found recently in the Gardener's Chronicle, give fascinating insights into the military and social history around such pursuits. More likely remains to be found in BHL texts. On this final slide, I want to emphasize again how working with digitized records and archives is not possible without the vast effort that takes place to bring these records and data to a state where it is possible for researchers, including scientists and historians, to begin to make these connections. I have named some of those who helped find specimens named in this talk, including the quality assurance team that I was part of during Kew's digitization project. Doing that work gave great insight into how digitizing the many specimens held in herbaria worldwide is a complex process. Resolving the issues that arise often involves drawing on digitized and, crucially, searchable tech, such as those held by the BHL, enabling cross-checks between herbaria, libraries, and similar institutions worldwide. In that sense, one of the most important acknowledgements is to thank those who have put together and continue to maintain the incredible resource that is the Biodiversity Heritage Library. I hope this talk has given some insight into some of the many ways it can be used to connect with digitized specimens. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher, for another great talk. And I'm struck in your comments and also in our previous paper about how so much of what we do is collaborative in nature, whether that's research or indeed coming together as BHL to make these accessible resources. We've got a little bit of time for questions now. I think there was possibly one held over from the previous session online, so maybe we start with that one if that's okay, Ben.
Yeah. This is from Gillian Parker, University of York. BHL has transformed the ability of garden historians to explore, in particular the 19th century, using the gardening press. This allows previously under-regarded nursery owners and gardeners to be brought into the light. But searching the material is challenging, to say the least. Are there any plans to make this easier?
So that's a question on behalf of garden historians who sometimes find that there's great stuff in BHL, but searching for that material can be difficult. Does anyone want to respond from the perhaps from the tech team? I know we've had discussions about searching and discoverability of BHL materials. We perhaps otherwise recognise that it's a challenge that we're working hard to overcome.
This is Mike Lichtenberg from the tech team. I'm not familiar with the publication. I don't know if that's a catalog of some sort. Often the OCR in those can be challenging, so that might be the first way to solve that problem, would be to improve the OCR, which is something that we are looking at doing hopefully in the next year or so.
Great. Thanks, Mike. To all those garden historians, watch the space. We'll get there. Do we have any questions in the room? Or while you're thinking, was there anything else online?
Yeah, there's another one online. Wonderful talks, thank you all. Question for any speaker or attendee with knowledge. How do we resolve the challenge of incorporating privately held or rare literature that is being gatekept in the hands of private collectors who do not want to share their rare books or reprints?
Is that one for BHL or for librarians and archivists? So that was a question about important material that is held in private collections and private hands, and how we make that accessible and persuade, I guess, those who might have it to release it. Does anyone want to take that on? I mean, I guess I should take a stab at that, having worked in libraries and archives and special collections, because I think there might be specific comments around BHL, but it's a perennial problem, and I think the way to tackle that is through good relationships and developing those over time, but also I think developing confidence in how that material is going to be used, whether that is about transferring that material to an institution on a loan or permanent basis, or indeed digitizing it. I would hope something like BHL, which seeks and is, I think, an authoritative and trustworthy voice, would be well placed to take on that challenge. But certainly it's a difficult one. Would any of our speakers like to add to that? If you're holding on to private material, if you're a benefactor, if you've got great archives in your collections, either of those things, come and speak to me later, please. Did we have any final questions in the room?
Yeah. Actually, this is for Sabine and Siobhan. I just wanted to ask, is there any kind of professional network dedicated to supporting research into women's role in this area?
Actually, it's important to understand this. The eponymy and taxa named for women is just one aspect of how we want to highlight the women's contributions. And also, it's not just looking at women as the only group. It's also about generally more the invisible or marginalized groups that contribute to science. But for women specifically, several institutions in Europe are working on this topic. For example, we at the Museum für Naturkunde, we have a group highlighting or researching women related to our museum and our collection and the material we have in the archive. There are similar efforts in the Naturhistorische Museum in Vienna, in Paris, and in other places. And in addition to this, we have created or co-created with several partners an international network that's called Women in Natural History Museums and Collections. And so this is a way to connect the people that are working in this field to reach out to others and hopefully collaborate and have, we have seminar series and different events, a conference in November in Vienna. So this is trying to bring those people together from different disciplines, literature scholars, biologists, archivists, data people, so really from different sources and combine the efforts.
Thank you. We're just, yeah, of course, please. Just wait for the microphone, please. It's all right. I feel so mean.
Just an observation. Although you found not so many, quite a lot of women, but you also in the minority as for names of genera, I've just been following my gut instinct that the same is not true of cultivar names. And I just zipped through the list of Passiflora cultivars, which I used to be registrar. And it's actually, I shall have to do an analysis to provide a definitive answer, but I'm prepared to bet that there are far more cultivars named after women than after men.
This is great to hear because that's what we want to have, and we want people to do more research in their own areas of expertise, and if there's a particular area where women are dominant, all the better.
Sorry, excuse me.
No, great comment. Bianca, did you have? We have a moment. Go ahead.
Thank you. In this last moment, I would like to know from the community online or those here. I think this was a question that came up not from myself, so I'm borrowing from the Living Data discussion that happened back in October. There was a panel, and part of that panel, someone had asked, well, isn't BHL, should BHL be the sort of one-stop shop for all of your biodiversity literature and archives? And so I'm just curious, there's such a proliferation, there's so many libraries and digital projects out there, and very few resources for BHL. What is it that you think we should focus on? Is it about assimilating all the content that we possibly can? Is it about improving search on the content that we currently have? There's so much to think about, but I'm just curious what would be the best deliverable BHL could provide.
I'm going to say we had time for a quick question, but
Sorry.
we maybe don't have time for
Sorry.
that answer. But if I may, I'm going to end with one question for Christopher. So Christopher, you mentioned some difficulties and challenges in connecting specimens and the like, and I guess this sort of links to what Bianca has just asked. If you could name one thing that would have made your life and your research a little bit easier with BHL and other colleagues in the room, what would it have been?
What would have made it easier?
You highlighted some challenges on your last slide. If there is one thing that BHL might be able to develop to overcome those challenges and make things a little bit easier, what would you like to see us do?
That's quite a difficult question. Just a wish list. Anything? Number one.
Number one.
to make it easier to find images.
Okay.
Some sort of way to, if you have an image, it kind of a bit like the reverse image lookup thing that you can do. But whether that could be integrated, I'm not sure. But yeah, that would be one.
You maybe didn't see, but I will let you know there were some BHL nods in the audience there. So thank you very much. We are just about on time, so I think we'll call it an end to the Q&A there. But to the audience for your participation, thank you very much, but especially to our speakers, thank you. We now come to our closing remarks, which you will be delighted to know aren't being given by me. We'll welcome David Iggulden, Chair of BHL, to the stage in just one moment. But as this is my last moment at the microphone, I'm going to hog it a little while longer, just to say something about David. I'm not sure he would have known when he took on the role of Chair of the Executive Committee of BHL just what he was letting himself in for. I don't think any of us did. But he has taken on that role with his customary good humour, kindness, inclusivity, hard work, and especially modesty, which is why it's down to others to say a great big thank you. Could you please give David a particularly warm round of applause? And on that note, David, why don't you draw BHL Day 2026 to a close?
Gosh, that's quite hard to respond to. Thank you very much, Rich, and thank you, everyone. I can say that a chair is only as good as his vice chair, and I'm very grateful to Rich for his endless support and assistance, and also prior to Rich, Kelly Trey, who is now our transition director, who is also an excellent vice chair, so thank you. Wow, what an interesting afternoon. Some really wonderful talks. Thank you so much to all our speakers. I always find it inspiring to hear the stories of how you work with BHL data and how it builds into your research, the connected projects it leads to and or supports, and other parallel projects in the field as well that again have been supported by BHL. I think it's clear we have an awful lot to celebrate at 20 years, and so a very happy birthday to BHL, but also we must look to the future, and obviously I think it's clear BHL really must continue. There is no question of that. We just need to make that happen, and that's very much what the topics have been about throughout our annual meeting this week and will continue to be tomorrow. So can I just say a thank you again to our speakers, to our host today for Natural History Museum, and particularly to Rich Wragg, our head of library here at NHM and also my vice chair, to all the BHL team and particularly Colleen Funkhauser. Oh, there you are, Colleen, at the very back, who always does enormous amount of organisation around BHL Day and makes sure everything works technically on the day, which is very much appreciated. So, and a huge thank you to you all for coming. It's been great to see so many of you. Do connect with us, do let us know, and particularly in terms of what you'd like to see from BHL, we are always interested in hearing more. So thank you all very much. Safe journey home, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.